Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Travis Sepala, and this is the I Might Be Wrong podcast. Thanks for joining me. Before I get started today, just a reminder to everybody to take the time, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, comment, leave 5-star ratings, whatever else it might be. Write a review depending on where you're watching or listening to this podcast. All of those things truly help me to grow this show, and it's something that really only takes a small amount of your time, so thank you in advance for doing that. Also, if there's anybody who wants to support the show financially, you will find the appropriate links below. And for anybody who wants to reach out to me and touch me, you also find my email contact there also to this show. So thank you in advance for all of these things, and let's get on with the show. I want to start out today by telling a story. The story is, let's just get into it and then we'll talk about it a little bit later. So, story goes is it's Christmas time and a little boy goes to a big Christmas party, and you have all of the things that surround normal Christmas parties, a big gathering of people, a meal, all kinds of wonderful food and celebrations. Some games get played, but ultimately nobody really cares, especially the little boy and all the other little boys and girls that are there, because the only thing that really matters is let's get to the presents, man. So it comes time to open the gifts, and being that there's children here, all of the children are opening their gifts up first, and so the boy has, his presents that everybody has brought him for this celebration, and he's so excited, and he reaches down and he opens up, he's been opening up toys, and he gets to one and he opens it up, and it doesn't even matter what it is. Just make it up in your head, and you don't even have to make it up. Just understand that the boy opens up a present and it's exactly what he wanted. He is so excited. He holds it triumphantly in the air, celebrating with anybody who's around him, showing his parents, his grandparents, everybody else around him how happy he is. Just look at, to show them the present that he's received. And, immediately he's thrilled by this. He wants everybody else to be happy with him. He wants to show it off. And he's trying to rip it out of the plastic in the middle of all of his joy when nearby another little boy opens up a present. And he just happens, to glance over. And as he glances over, his jaw drops. And he can't believe what he's looking at. And once again, it doesn't really matter what he's looking at. Just understand that it's better than what he now holds in his hands. And so suddenly, rather than wanting to celebrate with joy, he just sits there and stares at this other present. And then he stares back at his. And then he stares back at the present that the other boy is opening, and he stares back at his. And no longer is there a desire to celebrate with other people. The joyful feeling that he has, it's no longer there. Instead of feeling any sort of gratitude, the only thing he's really feeling at this point in time is jealousy, resentment, and a revulsion for what he has in his hands. And so rather than hold it up high for the world to see, the boy slams it to the ground and he storms out of the room. So what changed? How is it possible for someone to go in a very short moment of time from holding something up in celebration to slamming it to the ground and running out of the room? I think the answer to this question is important to me because it helps me get to the heart of what gratitude is. Because answering that question isn't necessarily an easy thing to do, because philosophers for thousands of years have puzzled over this. You can go all the way back to people like Aristotle and Seneca, who were writing about what gratitude was, all the way into the present day, where people are still arguing and debating as to what it is and what it isn't. So needless to say, there's no way I'm going to be able to cover in its entirety what gratitude is, what it isn't. I'm not going to be able to cover the entire philosophical opinion surrounding this, and definitely won't be able to cover everything that the scripture has to say about it. But for my purposes for this episode, I would simply like to say that it would be important, first and foremost, to say that I don't think it's an emotion. I don't think it's a feeling. I actually think gratitude is something bigger than that. I think it's a state of being. Philosophers would say that it's almost ontological in nature. It has to do with our very being. And when we're in this state of being, we have the ability to focus on what we have rather than on what we lack. And this is so important because if we focus in on what we lack, it makes it impossible to celebrate and to enjoy what we have, because we will always find something better. We will always find something better. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it is better. I mean, one of my favorite sayings concerning all of this it's basically a turn on another saying. So most people have heard the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, or the grass is always greener on the other side of the bridge. I love that saying. I love a saying that takes it and twists it, because they say, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, and most people don't realize that it's fertilized in terrible, stinky, let's say manure, just for the purposes of this podcast. Yeah. Just because it looks greener doesn't mean it is. But no matter what, if all we can do is focus in on what we lack, we're always going to find something that's better. And it becomes impossible for us to find any joy and contentment in our own lives. This is something that we see very early on played out for us in the scripture when we deal with what it is as humans, that we struggle with this. Because shortly after the fall of the human race, we have the story of Cain and Abel. And the story of Cain and Abel is a really fascinating one, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of different opinions about it, but it has much more to do with their, both Cain and Abel's approach towards God. And this is really important to understand, because I've heard people make statements, for instance, the story of Cain and Abel is, they're both bringing a sacrifice to the Lord. Cain brings he's a farmer who harvests the fields, and so he brings a bunch of grain as sacrifice. Abel, he brings a sacrifice of his animals, and it says his first, the best of his animals, and it takes care to point out that essentially the fattest of his animals, the most healthy, the best of his flock. And the Lord accepts Abel's sacrifice, and he doesn't accept Cain's. And I've heard, even from a young age, I can remember being taught, well, that's because all sacrifices have to be a living thing, and it has to be an animal. And that's just not true, because even within the Mosaic law, there are such thing as grain offerings. It's not that. It has to do much more with the state of being that they give it in. And it's also, it becomes very clear, when we read through this story, that Cain is responsible for everything that he's done. It's not as though Abel has done something to wrong him. Okay? In fact, all Abel did is he brought the best that he had. And it's interesting, it doesn't say that about Cain. It doesn't say that Cain went out and found the best and the most important of his grains and he brought it as an offering. Okay? It just said that he took a portion of what he had and he brought it. And so maybe that's the underlying problem right there. In the end, it doesn't really matter. We don't need to dig too deeply into that. What's far more important is God accepts one, he doesn't accept the other, and Cain's the one that doesn't get accepted. And in this moment, he can't focus in on what he has. He can't focus in on himself. The only thing he knows is that Abel has received something from God that he hasn't. And because he doesn't have the ability to even, maybe question whether or not he did something wrong, instead all he can do is look at what he didn't get from God and what Abel received. He's overcome with resentment, a resentment and an anger that actually drives him to a place where he's willing to kill somebody. And essentially this is what happens when there is no gratitude. People think like the opposite of gratitude is ingratitude, and that's what's interesting when you dig into the philosophical literature. Because, you have gratitude and then you have like non-gratitude. Well, what is non-gratitude? Most, even secular people will say to not be somebody who is grateful is something that's vice-like. It's terrible. It's abominable. Because what it produces in a person is terrible. The fruits of it are actually resentment. And this resentment can lead people to have hatred for people who have things that they don't have, a deep sense of jealousy, a sense of despair, and no ability whatsoever to celebrate or think that there is anything good in my own life. And man, is that powerful. And it's powerful in a very negative way. When I think that there's nothing in my life that's worth celebrating, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm constantly comparing myself to other people. And this is why I said this, that this is what I think is important to understand about what gratitude is. It's not necessarily something that I think I can just define as I sit here. I think it's something that's much more of a state of being. And this state of being gives me the ability to focus in on what I have rather than what I lack. And it's so important, because if that's what gratitude is, then the opposite is looking at what I lack and focusing in on what I lack. And as I do this, having no ability to celebrate or even to understand what I currently have in my life. And this is why even in the 10 Commandments, we're given something that, essentially tells us what the opposite of gratitude is. Gives us something that really digs into the nature of what gratitude is. Because there's these 2 commandments at the end where we are told, do not covet. Don't covet your neighbors, just your neighbor in general, what they have, and don't covet them and their stuff. So essentially, the way I've always looked at it is just don't covet their very lives, and don't covet all the things that you have. And when you dig into this idea of what it means to covet, it means to look at other people's stuff and wish that was mine. And to make the assumption that if I had what they had, if I had the life that they had, if I had the possessions that they had, if I had the wife that they had, if I had the children that they have, if I had, their animals, if I had it, their job or whatever else it might be, then I would be happy. And it gives careful instruction that we're not supposed to do it, because even here there's this understanding that the end of that road is misery and despair. It doesn't, lead to anything that gives us the ability to be happy and content with what it is that we had. And it's so important to understand this, because there is this understanding and teaching within the entirety of the Bible where we're being instructed constantly to be content, to find contentment. And the only way we can really do this is if we actually have gratitude. And this is why gratitude is so important. It's important because it changes everything. Without gratitude, there is no ability to be happy with what I have. I cannot in any way celebrate it, because I will always be hyper aware of the fact that there's always somebody who has something that I don't have. And because they have something that I don't have, well, then I think that my life is going to be better. And man, it's so sneaky in our day and age because of the internet. Because through the internet, we have the ability to be aware of the lives of millions of people rather than just a small group of people in a village that we're surrounded by. No, we're now aware of what everybody has. We're aware of the lives that they live, the amazing vacations that they take, the amazing houses that they live in, the cars that they drive. The relationships that they have. And we don't even know if any of those things are real, because in a lot of cases, when most people are posting stuff on the internet, they're only really showing you, something that's actually been produced so that they can actually grow content in this way. And so in a lot of these cases, a person can easily find themselves longing for something that isn't even real. Because there's no way to confirm if those people who are posting those things even really have those, live that kind of life. Because it's pretty easy to just kind of, go rent a house. put some money down and go rent a house for the weekend through Airbnb or whatever else, and then walk people through this amazing house that you live in and pretend like it's yours, and all of a sudden everybody's looking at it and saying, oh my goodness, I wish I had their life. Not realizing you're actually wishing for a life that doesn't even exist. Think about how easy and how miserable we can become. Not only we're fantasizing about a fantasy that doesn't even exist, a fantasy that somebody else created. Yeah, that's why gratitude becomes important, because all of a sudden those things no longer have power over us. Because it brings me to a place where I can be content with what I have right now. And I can understand that no matter what my circumstances are, I have something that's worth celebrating every single day of my life. I say that, I have been through some really difficult times in my life. I have. Many of us have. And if I wanted to look at, other people's lives or whatever else, it would be really easy for me to say, man, what a miserable wretch I am. But the truth be told is, no, I have an amazing wife. I have 3 amazing children. They're all healthy, there might be some problems, but they're still alive and they're with me and they care about me. There's a lot of people that can't say the same thing. There's so many things in my life every single day that I can be thankful for. I have the ability to move around. I have the ability, just to even see when I realize there's other people that can't. There's food that I can eat. There's so many things that I can take joy in. And this is why gratitude changes everything also. Because it doesn't rely on our circumstances. It doesn't matter whether our circumstances are up or down, and they will. They'll be good, and then they'll be bad, and then they'll be good again, and then they'll be bad. But regardless of anything like that, gratitude actually gives us the ability to celebrate every moment of our life, understanding that there is something worth living for. There is hope that can be found. But where do we find that hope? That's what's so interesting. When the Bible instructs us to search out something like gratitude or contentment, it doesn't tell us to look for something, necessarily within ourselves. Because everything that, every circumstance that we have, it is going to ebb and flow. So our circumstances themselves can't be the source of our gratitude. It actually has to be something that truly is constant, something that's outside of ourselves. And that's why I find it fascinating. In the book of Hebrews, in fact, Hebrews chapter 13, for anybody's listening, just so you know, there's an ambulance going by. So that's not you. That's on my side, and I'm probably not going to edit this out because I don't like to do a whole lot of editing. But so just so you know, an ambulance did go by. Anyways, getting back, Hebrews chapter 13, there is this, this is as the entirety of it is wrapping up, and instruction is being given to the listener, to the reader. And one of the final instructions that we're given is to keep ourselves from the love of money and to be content with what we have. Now, it's interesting, it gives this instruction, and then there's essentially a because. You should keep yourself from the love of money, be content with what you have, because it says that God has said. Because God has said to you, I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. You can be content. You don't have to obsess over what other people have. And the reason you can do this, the reason this is possible is because you know that God has said to you, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. And this is, a concrete source of joy. This is something, a source of gratitude that's, inexhaustible, because it doesn't come from a circumstance going up and down. The truth of the matter is this is a constant that's found in the fact that no matter what we go through in our lives, it will never change the way God views us. It will never change the way He feels about us. It will never affect the value that we have in His eyes. And it will never change the fact that we belong to Him. Nothing can ever take that away from us. That can never be robbed from us. And that's why, when you get into the very next verse, it says that, we can say, we can essentially say because of this, and it's actually quoting another portion of the scripture, but it says, we can say because of this, that if the Lord is our helper, what can anybody do to us? If we find our value in the Lord, what can anybody do to take it away? The truth of the matter is there is nothing. So this is what I find amazing, is that the Bible constantly instructs us to find contentment, in our lives, but it doesn't point us towards finding contentment by pretending that we are happy. Closing our eyes really tight and just assuming that if I do this, fake it until I make it long enough, then that'll happen. No, it actually points us to a higher reality. It points us to a higher sense of identity. It points us to a higher sense of value, and that value is not found from something that I get from looking within, but actually it's a value that's found from understanding that there's actually a God who's created the world around us. He's created me, and He cares. And it's because He cares about me that I have value, and because He cares about you, that's what gives you value. And that's why every single day there can be gratitude in your life. And that's why gratitude becomes possible, no matter what the circumstances are. Because the source is something that doesn't ebb and flow. The source is God's love for us. So be grateful for what you have in your life. Take a look at it. And I realize, for anybody listening, some of you, you might be going through some difficult things. I've been through difficult things. Some of you might be going through some wonderful things. And regardless of who you are, understand there is something right now, if you're completely honest with yourself, you can find something every single day in your life that you can be thankful for, that you can be grateful for, that you can celebrate. And there's also something, no matter what is going on in your life, that is bigger than your life that you can celebrate. And that's the fact that you are created in the image of God, loved by that God, to the point that He would send His own Son to die for you. This is powerful. This is gratitude. And it changes everything. Not because it changes everything, interestingly enough, but rather it changes everything because it allows us to focus in on what we have so we can celebrate it. The story I told at the very beginning, it's not a made-up story. It's something I watched. I kind of keep the identity from everybody. I might have, changed the details a little bit, but I remember watching it. I remember watching a little boy take and celebrate something and hold it up high and shortly, a very short period of time later, throw it to the ground in disgust. Because for one moment, his focus changed. Don't let that be us. Don't let that be us. Instead, let us celebrate every single day, and as we do so, understand that this ability, this gratitude, makes every day a day worth living. A day where there is always hope to be found. Thank you very much for listening, and I can't wait to see you again.